thank you all. We're ready to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome you here again. We have been spending 2 fantastic days together. In the spirit of really true informality, I feel this has been practiced abundantly. And it is obviously a dream in many ways, because for us, as I'm clicking through everybody who has supported and contributed to, for us, this practice is the payoff already. We want to thank the artists who came. I should go back here. Jen Kiru, Bradford Young, Elissa, Blount, Moorhead, Sean Peter, and Stephanie Santoinge were with us on opening night, and it was a absolutely fantastic conversation, generated and prompted by Michelle Prediman. All of them had to leave either last night or early this morning because of the approaching hurricane in New York City. So they were really, really disappointed not to be able to stay with us a little longer. And we have been figuring out creative and, as always, improvisational ways of dealing with this and also still make them feel present. We had the fantastic opportunity to have a more sustained time with Kaya Lu, and we're very grateful for her graciousness and for being in conversation with us. I also welcome here the members of the editorial board of the journal, including my indispensable partner in crime, Lauren McLeod Kramer. She can get an applause, by the way. What we call the ground crew in many ways has been absolutely stunning. And that concludes the formalities. So Elissa Blount Moorhead is already in Baltimore right now. And she is following us on Zoom. There she is. Hi, Elissa. And because of this, we are going to change the order of the presentations so that she can listen to Ekow, Eshun, and Mark Anthony Neal, and then give her a presentation, and then we slide into the Q&A. We figured this would be, I'm going to minimize you now, Elissa. Okay. Excellent. So Ekow Eshun is chairman of the 4th Plinth, overseeing the foremost public art program in the UK, and the former director of the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. He's curator of exhibitions, including most recently in the Black Fantastic, an exhibition I did not get to see, but I know in my bones that it will change the course of how, let's call it the Black Fantastic is approached. At the Hayward Gallery in London, awarded by the Association for Art History's Curatorial Prize for Exhibition in 2023. And he's author of books including Back Gold of the Sun, shortlisted for the Orwell Prize, and Africa's State of Mind, nominated for the Lucy Photo Book Prize, and in the Black Fantastic, a finalist for the 2023 Locus Awards. Described by The Guardian as a cultural polymath, true, he's the writer and presenter of documentaries, including the BBC film Dark Matter, A History of the Afrofuture, the Tate Modern film series Exploring the Black Atlantic, and the BBC Radio 4 series White Mischief. He has contributed to books on artists including Mark Bradford, Kenda Wiley, Chris Ofili, Jana Kamfra, and Wanjechi Mutu, and his writing has appeared in publications including the New York Times, the Financial Times, The Guardian, The Observer, Esquire, and Wired. He holds an honorary doctorate from London Metropolitan University. Please help me welcome Ekow Eshun. This is you. Do you want me to share? Yeah. And do all that? All right. Yeah. This. I'm challenged in terms of my eyesight, not just other ways. Okay.
If you play it, it should come up. Let's see if it comes up full screen. Yeah, there we go. Right.
Okay.
Oh no, hold on. There's various other things. I don't know how to work the other random stuff from there.
Yeah. I don't even know where my cursor is now. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, we need someone to help get rid of that.
It's the Zoom.
Oh, fine.
So I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Pull it
Fine,
down,
let's do
I
that.
don't know.
And then the other one. That share screen is still there still.
Yeah. Well, we might need to just put them down.
Yeah, we can just put them in the corner.
If I can find my, the problem is that it's black on black. I can find the cursor. No, there it is. All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I always think it's better, it's kind of prefer standing if we're going to talk. Otherwise, you're kind of sitting behind a weird desk. It feels a bit over-formal. So, anyway, want to talk this afternoon in our session. This session, I think, formally is called Curating for Sound. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of a couple of different Black British artist filmmakers that I've been working with recently. Rhea Storr, Alberta Whittle, Julian Knox. I've shown their work in exhibitions, I've done talks with them, I've written texts about them. I want to talk about their work specifically in relation to ideas of movement. Two types of movement in particular. As we'll see, I'm going to play a couple of clips. As we see, they work in their moving image works, they work with the body, with sound, with movement, with music, as an expressive grammar in their work. I also want to talk about movement in terms of African diasporic movement. I'm interested in their work in the ways that they reach out to their familial origins in Africa and the Caribbean as a way to conjure or think through Black British identity as a multiple, not singular condition, as a positionality that grapples with legacies of empire and slavery and colonialism. Let me illustrate this a little bit to begin with two short clips that I'm going to play. The first is by the artist Rhea Storr, whose family origins lie in the Bahamas. This is a short clip from a film she made in 2020 called Here is the Imagination of the Black Radical. This is the film shot in the Bahamas. It's shot during Junkanoo, which is a form of carnival in the Bahamas that was originated by the enslaved people of the island. As a moment of celebration, we know the ideas of carnival. Rhea's film follows the Shell Saxon Superstars, who are a carnival group. The film explores Junkanoo as a political, as much as an aesthetic event. It suggests carnival as a speculative invocation of bodies in movement, bodies in liberation, moving away from the normative, moving into liberation. So I'm going to play a clip. It's about a minute long. Sorry.
You have to watch, observe, and be determined.
So, yeah, here is the imagination of the black radical. Reastor's film takes its title, this reference to the black radical imagination. It's a term coined by Robin D.G. Kelly. He had in mind that term as a way to describe US black radical organizing in the 20th century, but here, Reastor suggests that term, black radical imagination, to describe this convergence of display and movement, of sound and gathering, suggests this as a radical formulation of black gathering, presence, and being. So let's have a look. Let's move this down out there a bit further. Now, I also want to play another clip for a moment from another work by Elissa. All right. Get her up. Hold on. Where's the cursor gone? Okay. Fine. Good. All right. So, so this is a work by Alberta Whittle, who, again, is a British artist whose family origins lie in Barbados. This is, I'm going to play a clip from a work called Ligara, The Last Born. This is a film that's shot in Britain, shot in Barbados, shot in Sierra Leone in Italy. The film is a work anchored around themes of abolition, rebellion, empire, ancestral knowledge, and love. Alberta Whittle's aim is to situate black care and love in proximity with historical sites of trauma. So we see gestures, rituals, moments of intimacy that are juxtaposed with reflection on grief, on loss, on mourning and collective memory. It's a work, then, that's a reflection on the trauma inflicted upon the black body through hundreds of years. And it's a work that's also a reflection on the black body, white privilege, and power.
Our morning has gone on too long.
Okay, so look, I wanted to show both of those, and those are, I guess those are kind of trailers for both of those films. I wanted to show both of those because they illustrate, for me, some of the questions, some of the wider questions that these artists are looking at, both Reastor and Alberta Whittle. Kind of elaborate on that. So I worked with both of these artists on an exhibition that I did in 2022. that brought together the work of a younger generation of artists, including these two, in conversation with the work of John Okomfora. So John Okomfora, as an artist, has consistently scrutinized these issues of Black British identity and post-colonialism, as well as a kind of broader span of questions about migration, movement, climate, empire. And these artists are interrogating similar themes of history, identity, and belonging in their work. Through their work, I suggest that we see some of the complex interactions of race, place, aesthetics, and belonging that Stuart Hall identified in the late 80s as a characteristic of Black British creative practice, more generally. When Hall was talking, he had in mind people like John Okomfora and Black Audio Film Collective. He had in mind people like Isaac Julian or Rotimi Fani-Kayode or Sonia Boyce. But the same point, I think, can be made for the likes of Alberta Whittle and Rhea Storr. So Hall talked about how Black British artists, he said, are instinctively working across cultural boundaries and vocabularies. They work, he said, with and on difference, but they don't have a binary either-or conception of difference. They know that everyone comes from somewhere, speaks from someplace, is multiply positioned. These points about Black British practice, this idea that Stuart Hall speaks of gathering together of perspectives, kind of hybrid state of position, geography, legacy, memory, can also be made about another artist that I've been working with recently called Julian Knox. Julian Knox is originally from Sierra Leone. He's opened an exhibition in London, in the Barbican, that opened last week, called Chorus, in rememory of flight. The heart of this exhibition is a 3-screen work that we see in installation here, Chorus in rememory of flight, which takes place across 9 different European cities. He traveled across Lisbon, Hamburg, Berlin, Marseille, Antwerp, Barcelona, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and London. And in each city, he collected what he calls encounters with Black residents there. This chiefly took the form of filming kind of creative offerings that people gave him. Sometimes that took place in the form of movement or dance or music. But in each place, he also filmed a Black choir in each of these cities, made up of, Black people in each of those cities who'd formed their own choirs. We can see one example in the middle there. This is a choir from London. The film, in its broader sense, was really about the experience of living and traveling within Europe as a Black person. So while the likes of Rhea Storr and Alberta Whittle, who I played a moment ago, centered on a dynamic between Britain and its colonial legacies, Julian's work looks broader to consider Black presence across Europe. He's considering the role of the Black person as stranger in Europe. This idea of the stranger is an idea that, in fact, James Baldwin explored. James Baldwin wrote a kind of influential short essay, 1955, Stranger in the Village, which talked about his experience of spending some months in a village in the Swiss mountains. He talked about his experience of alienation and outsiderness during that period. Julian Knox does something similar in this film, but here he's talking from an African diasporic perspective, not necessarily one of African American. He's thinking about what it means to live within these European cities that were centers of colonial expansion and exploitation. He's thinking about what it means to be of Africa and live within Europe. Charged histories of these places. Lisbon, for instance, one of the cities he visits, has a long history that goes back to the very, very beginnings of the Atlantic slave trade, when Portuguese traders brought the first large number of enslaved people from Africa to Europe in 1444. I want to take a moment. I'll play a clip from Julian's film, but before that, a brief digression, because I want to dig into some of the historic concept that informs a work like this. This is a portrait of a formerly enslaved African man called Oluwade Equiano. In 1789, at the age of 44, Equiano, who was a writer and an abolitionist, he was an active abolitionist, he was living in Britain, living in London, published his autobiography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Oluwade Equiano, published in 1789. The book traced his journey from being kidnapped and enslaved in the west coast of Africa and Nigeria into enslavement to emancipation, and then into an active role as an abolitionist. It details his remarkable life also as a free African person in Europe, navigating and then surmounting the precarious nature of 18th century society. His book, The Interesting Narrative, is the first personal account of the brutal realities of slavery. The memoir, when it was published, sparked a sensational response. It was republished 9 times during his lifetime. By the time of his death in 1797, the book had gone through 9 editions, and he'd become the wealthiest man of African origin living in Britain. I want to dwell just for a moment, though, not on that, accepting those accomplishments. I want to dwell for a moment here on a remarkable decade in Equiano's life, between the end of his enslavement and his rise to stardom in Georgia and England. Equiano moves to London in the year 1767. He's 22 years old. He's managed to secure his freedom from slavery. He's bought his freedom from slavery. And he moves to London in 1767. He's 22 years old. He's free. He's a free man after enduring more than a decade in slavery. He settles in London, and initially, he's kind of giddy with the sense of freedom. He undertakes a number of things. For a profession, he cuts hair. He learned how to cut hair because he was an enslaved person serving in the Royal Navy in Britain, where he learned to cut hair. So he cuts hair. He takes maths lessons in the evening. He takes lessons with the French horn in the evening. He has this interesting life for a period where he's almost at leisure. But then after about a year, he describes himself as being too much of a roving disposition to settle in one place for long. So he leaves London and he goes back across the Atlantic into the slave colonies, and he becomes a kind of independent trader. He's buying and selling goods in the Caribbean, in the Americas. He's traveling across Europe, trading goods. And for a decade, he has this fascinating life as a man of independent means. He writes in his memoir about seeing these different sites. He sees Mount Vesuvius when it's exploded, and he stands on the deck of a ship watching the volcano explode in Italy. He ends up going to the North Pole. He becomes probably the first black person in the Arctic Circle when he takes part in a Navy mission. He has this kind of, and even in one particular dark and strange period, he also ends up becoming the overseer of a plantation and procuring slaves himself of a plantation in Panama. So he has a strange period when he is apparently free to do what he wants. But this is 18th century London, and although he has an ability to negotiate the vagaries of Georgian society, his story also offers an illustration of how exceptionally fraught it was for an African to attempt to live freely during the era of slavery. So although he has room to roam, each city he visits also reminds him of his own marginal status. So he's in Naples, but his experience of and he writes about the beauty and grandeur of Naples, but then he talks about how his experience of that city is soured by the sight of enslaved men in the city. As an African in an Atlantic world where black people are considered inferiors as a matter of nature and law, he remains a perpetual outsider. So even as a free man, he faces the constant risk of being cheated in business by white merchants or being kidnapped back into slavery. And so despite his ability to make his way through society, he remains still a stranger, a wanderer in an Atlantic world where Africans are viewed as inherently bestial or other. Immanuel Kant, writing at a similar time, says the Negro can be disciplined and civilized, but is never genuine. The Negro can be disciplined and cultivated, but is never genuinely civilized. He falls of his own accord into savagery. So this is the world that Equiano is walking through. We can think about his wanderings, we can think about him perhaps as a prototypical figure of the black diaspora, the African diaspora, a man whose personal journey, whose personal history is shaped, as Paul Gilroy describes it, by the movements of black people, not only as commodities, but engaged in various struggles towards emancipation, autonomy, and citizenship. I wanted to think about Equiano for a moment, because for me this is the larger context for a work like Julian Knox's Chorus in Rememory of Flight. Remember, we are thinking about these different European cities, black presence in these cities, and how Julian Knox's invitation and engagement with different choirs, with music, with movement. His film offers a way to use song and music, suggests these as a form of resistance. He's exploring what it means to be caught between and to be of multiple places. He's thinking aloud about this legacy of African presence in Europe and how historically it was fraught, remains so in different ways to the present. So I'm going to play, this is about 4 minutes long. It's a kind of short version. This film is ordinarily 40 minutes long. This is a kind of shortened version of that I'm going to play right now.
You're about to leave one country. You don't know when you're going to return. You've never been there before. You sort of have an idea what it is. You don't know what difficulties you're going to encounter. I was taught when I was young that you go and say goodbye, not just to your elders dad, to enable you to cross the river. Because if you don't do that, you might be eaten by the crocodiles. You know? The river is the beginning. The river is the transport. The river, the water, to the sea and the cross. All those people were forced to encounter the journey. They didn't say goodbye to their ancestors. You leave without goodbye. So it's a rupture. It's a different departure. It's a traumatic experience.
For me, flight is about thinking about power and thinking about power relationships and thinking about community. But when you're speaking to power, that's a different type of flight into the fight, right?
Ingilos mama Shaya mapigo Ingilos mama Shaya mapigo
It's not white people and black folk. It's whiteness and blackness and everydays or traditions, right? Traditions grown out of an everyday. One oppressive, the other one in resistance and imaginative and wanting a different world. That's what attracts me to black radical traditions.
Thousands of hands that will catch my soul. Thousands of hands that will catch my soul. With their embrace, I'm feeling whole. With their embrace, I'm feeling sharing my burden, I'm not alone. Sharing my burden, I'm not alone. Thousands of hands that will catch my soul. With their embrace, I'm feeling whole. With their embrace, I'm feeling whole. Sharing my burden, I'm not alone. Sharing my burden, I'm not alone. Yes, the sun's got me, I'm feeling warm.
We're very at the very beginning of the preface to understand the world in which we live in, how it's come to be what it's like, and how we might get out of to the end of the tunnel. We need to have that relationship with our past, present, and futures.
So that's a short version of Chorus in Rememory of Flight, which is a kind of 40-minute film. In all of these cities, I guess what's going on in this film is that in all of these cities where black presence goes back hundreds of years, black experience is still one of hostility, still one of outsiderness. There's a clip in the full 3-screen longer version of the film where Julian goes to different cities. At one point, he's in Antwerp, and we see a recurring motif that he comes across in the city of hands. A hand on the side of a building, a large kind of sculpture of a hand in the middle of the city, chocolate hands that you can buy. You can't buy one chocolate hand, you have to buy a whole bunch of them for some reason. They don't sell them by the single. So this is Antwerp, this is Belgium. Apparently in Belgium, apparently in Antwerp, they talk about there's a myth of the city. It's kind of a founding myth of the city where there's a kind of giant that was held back by someone holding up their hand. But if you know anything about Belgium's history, if you know anything about Belgium's relationship to Africa, to the Congo, one thinks of the 19th century. One thinks about the Belgian Congo. One thinks about rubber plantations in the Belgian Congo, where African workers, plantation workers, who didn't work hard enough, had their hands chopped off. Baskets of hands set down at the feet of colonial administrators and commanders. This became a symbol of the Congo Free State. Millions of people killed. Routinely, people had their hands amputated. So I see these as a symbol. We see these as a symbol of the kind of dual nature of being African in a city like this. So apparently in Antwerp, they relate none of this to the colonial history of the city, and yet it seems inescapable when you buy half a dozen chocolate hands. In such a blighted historical context, the question comes, what form can resistance take? How do you assert black being and personhood when the simple fact of your humanity risks being denied? How do you make your voice heard in order to insist upon your aliveness? I'm going to do one last historical example for a moment. In 1891, a South African group, the African Choir, toured Europe for 2 years. They went to Britain, they went to Germany, they traveled across Europe. They performed traditional African songs as well as Christian hymns and also English ballads. They drew large crowds wherever they went. They even sung for Queen Victoria. And they were a hit. The virtuosity of the group, their facilities as singers, undermined European ideas, even amongst kind of initially skeptical critics, undermined European ideas about the primitive character of black people. In Germany, for instance, the home of Bach and Beethoven and Brahms, critics were forced to concede, after listening to them, that black music deserved the same high regard as Western music. I guess it's my contention that the African choir did more than simply confound white expectations. Their performances also affirmed black aliveness in joining their voices together, in creating their moments of gathering. They invoked a world for a moment where black being was not defined by the long shadow of slavery. Instead, through their songs, it was possible to imagine a world beyond white imposition, beyond white confinement and stricture, a world based on gathering and connection and kinship, as much as the ordinary things of hope and sorrow or fear and love. And I'd suggest this is also what Julian Knox's film is illustrating, this fashioning of kinship and resistance and virtuosity. I'd suggest we also see that in the earlier works, in the earlier clips that I showed by Rhea Storr and Alberta Whittle. These worlds where music and movement offer a space and offer a way to imagine a world that brings to mind Tina Camp's notion of refusal. So Tina Camp talks about refusal as a refusal to recognize a system that renders you fundamentally illegible and unintelligible. The decision to reject the terms of diminished subjecthood under which one is presented, using negation as a generative and creative source of disorderly power to embrace the possibility of living otherwise. I suggest that's what's going on across this work. Now, I'm going to finish, but to tie us back to the subject of music video, which is what Alessandro invited me to talk about in the first place, I want to turn and close into another black British artist, the musician Sampha. So Sampha is a British artist, you might know him. He co-wrote some of Solange's album. He co-wrote, I think, Don't Touch My Hair, possibly Cranes as well, Cranes in the Sky. Sampha is originally from Sierra Leone. In his work, I'd suggest, musically and also visually, works within some of the same language of cultural hybridity that unites Alberta Whittle's work and Rhea Storr's work and Julian Knox's work. Here I'm thinking specifically, beyond the music in itself, I'm thinking specifically of the short film Process that he made with Khalil Joseph, that Khalil Joseph directed for him, which was a kind of long-form video that accompanied his album from 2017, Process. I'm going to play a short trailer, I guess, for Process right now.
papa na be stress.
Alimba.
Oui, maman.
Took the brake pads out the car.
So, through all of these works, it's just what you see is an attempt to think about African diasporic identity by reaching beyond some of the constraints of being positioned as a stranger, by reaching beyond Britain, let's say, thinking about these geographies and these lineages and the generative potential of reaching to Sierra Leone, where a process was shot, or reaching out. Through what we see, I think, in these works that I showed, we see that through movement, through voice, we gain a glimpse of that living otherwise that Tina Campt talked about, this using negation as a generative and creative source of disorderly power. What we see is living otherwise as another name for black resistance, black beauty, black possibility, black humanness, black aliveness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ekow. I'm going to stop sharing and minimize you so that you're not in the spotlight too much. Okay. I forgot to mention that Ekow is also part of the, he's one of the associate editors for the journal, Liquid Blackness, Journal of Black Aesthetics and Black Studies, and someone was being incredibly supportive of the work we do. And so is Mark Anthony Neal, who both of them have contributed to the journal. Mark is excessively almost gracious in accepting our invitations, and he just arrived this morning, and we're absolutely thrilled to have him one more time. Mark Anthony Neal is James B. Duke Distinguished Professor of African American Studies, Professor of English, and Professor of Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies at Duke University, where he teaches courses in Black popular culture, including signature courses on the history of Black humor, Black masculinity, and the Motown and American culture. Neal is the author of 6 books, including the just published Black Ephemera, The Crises and Challenges of the Musical Archive, What the Music Said, Black Popular Music and Public Culture, Soul Babies, Black Popular Culture, the Post-Soul Aesthetics, and Looking for Leroy, Illegible Black Masculinities. He's the co-editor with Murray Furman and Regina Bradley of That's the Joint, the Hip Hop Studies Reader, the 3rd edition forthcoming. Wow, excellent. Neal has been featured in several documentaries, including PBS Hip Hop, Beyond the Beats and Rhymes, Netflix, The 2 Killings of Sam Cooke, and A&F's Right to Offend, the Black Comedy Revolution, and even portrayed himself in an episode of the BET scripted drama, Being Mary Jane, which starred Gabrielle Union. So this is really my eyesight. Okay. At Duke, Neal directs the Center for Arts, Digital Culture, and Entrepreneurship, which produces original digital content, including the weekly web-nominated video podcast, Left of Black, now in its 14th season, produced in collaboration with the John Hope Franklin Humanities Institute at Duke. I should just add that, as we heard yesterday, was elaborated upon by John Roberts specifically. It was a conversation between Mark Anthony Neal and Nuri McMillan within Left of Black, where we received as a gift this formulation, music video as Black art. It was very much of a conversation, but they ended up pretty much finishing each other's sentence, and that's when we knew we had to really take up the offer. So I'll leave it to Mark. So you're going to be here? Well, we're closing Elissa otherwise. Do you want me just to move it?
Yeah, that'd be
fine. Yeah, because she's here. I can, if you want to sit down, I can
That's
turn it
fine.
towards you, maybe. Yeah, because we can move.
Sitting is just as fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for that introduction. So as Alessandra just mentioned, my most recent book is a book called Black Ephemera, and it's a book, a meditation, if you will, on Black archives, particular case studies. The first chapter looks at the Stax Recording Company and the way that Al Bell and those artists rebuilt that record company's archives after the archives were largely taken from them by Atlantic Records. The second chapter looks at an experimental novel by Ricardo Cortez Cruz, 5 Days of Bleeding, as an input into the use of music and the archive of Black women's trauma. A small portion of that was published in Liquid Blackness 2 years ago. The fourth chapter is an examination of Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin and their contributions to the American Songbook and the different strategies that they used. Marvin Gaye wanting to be Frank Sinatra and spending the last 30 years of his career trying to perfect this collection of torch songs, which he re-recorded and re-edited and layered his voice when the technology allowed throughout his life. And then, Aretha Franklin's this fundamental ability to sing anything and make it her own contribution to the American Songbook. But it's the last chapter that I want to riff on this afternoon, a chapter that in some ways is almost a separate and distinct book from the rest of the project, where I really double down on thinking about this concept of Black archives as both fugitive archives and maroon archives. And specifically, what I want to talk about today is some of the filmmaking of Charles Burnett and the influence that Charles Burnett's work would have on later generations of filmmakers, in particular Barry Jenkins, and their use of the Black musical archive, but a very specific analog style of archive that I argue disrupts some of the images that we see on screen. Hello Stranger is a reference to the Barbara Lewis song that I hope some of you know. Hello Stranger, fugitive analogs in the Black digital era. Charles Burnett's Killer Sleep Cheap provides useful evidence of the strategies that some Black filmmakers have used to leverage Black music as a disruptive force in the context of long-form cinema. As Morgan Woosley writes in her essay, Resoundings, Music and the Political Goals of the LA Rebellion, filmmakers such as Burnett, Julie Dash, Larry Clark sought to, quote, depathologize the wide range of musics of the African diaspora and expand understandings of what Black music could sound like. The filmmakers who emerged out of the LA Rebellion anticipate the formation of the Black Audiovisual Collective in Britain in the early 1980s, as well as providing direct inspiration for contemporary filmmakers. LA Rebellion member Haile Gerima, for instance, additionally credited important context in film pedagogy with the lab that he established at Howard University. Black music for, quote unquote, Black music for this generation of filmmakers, Rango and Kramer Wright, constituted a model of actualization, of exploration, and the intergenerational relations, a living archive of the past and a laboratory for the imagination of the future. Specifically, Woosley cites Burnett's oft-stated desire for Killer of Sheep to function as a history lesson in Black music. In a film that so brilliantly exploits the archive of Black music for the purposes of illuminating the exteriorities and interiorities of Black working class life in Los Angeles in the 1970s, the most striking musical occasion occurs with the use of Dinah Washington's This Bit of Earth, in a moment of intimacy between the protagonist, Stan, and Stan's wife, as she's simply known in the film, portrayed by the late Casey Moore. Embodied in their slow drag, which abruptly ends when the music does, as Stan leaves the frame, This Bit of Earth offers a quiet disruption to the drudgery of Stan's life and a glimpse of possibility for his wife. Indeed, Stan's wife, memory reflects on that moment as, quote, memories that just don't seem mine, like half-eaten cake. The comments from Stan's wife highlight the fleeting aspect of their moment of intimacy, which is no doubt a comment on the nature of their relationship, but also how intimacy might function as a form of ephemera within Maroon archives. I would further suggest that this disruption, the appearance of an early 1960s classic, from an iconic, though often overlooked musical figure in an era marked by the electronic pulsations of disco and funk, functions like a return, if not from the dead, but from a stranger, which in the colloquialisms of Black life is not so much a stranger, but someone or something that had not been seen in some time. As Kevin Quashie writes, quiet is, quote, often used interchangeably with silence or stillness. Quiet instead is a metaphor for the full range of one's inner self, one's desires, ambitions, hungers, vulnerabilities, fears. This moment of quiet in The Killer of Sheep, as a decidedly analog disruption, mirrors the quiet in which actual Maroons might have moved in their effort to travel from Maroon outposts to family and friends who might have been on plantations. Indeed, the way that Stan leaves the frame after his dance mirrors this ethos. Charles Burnett's use of the Black musical archive in The Killer of Sheep serves as citation in Barry Jenkins' Moonlight. Like Killer of Sheep, the soundscape of Moonlight is overfilled with a gorgeous contemporary score by Nicholas Britell, enhanced by Britell's application of the chopped and screwed technique that emerged out of the Houston hip-hop scene in the early 1990s, most notably in the work of the late DJ Screw. There are two particular occasions in the film where Jenkins draws on the analog Black musical archive to enact moments of sonic and emotional disruption, not unlike Barnett's use of This Bit of Earth. In the first example, the main character, Chiron, witnesses his mother, Paula, portrayed by Naomi Harris, engage in a seemingly stimulant-induced shimmy to Aretha Franklin's One Step Ahead. Paula is in fact dancing for an unnamed suitor who presumably provides her with drugs. The sonic disruption of One Step Ahead offers a brief glimpse into Paula's interiority. She becomes the embodiment of the half-eaten cake that Stan's wife memorializes in The Killer of Sheep. That Franklin's song is likely most known to contemporary audiences as source material for Yassine Bey, Mos Def's Miss Fat Booty, quote, as so fat you can see it from the front, only highlights Paula's own unspoken recollections of her former self, younger, clean, voluptuous, and without child. Moonlight depicts Chiron, and we know him in the film as Little Chiron in Black, from his childhood where he experienced emotional abandonment, his struggles with colorism as a darkened Black teen, and moments of same-sex intimacy with a childhood friend portrayed by Emmy Award-winning actor Jarrell Jerome as a teen and Andre Holland as an adult, through his incarceration. It is a late-night phone call from Kevin when both are adults that sets the scene for Chiron's reconnection with Kevin at a diner where the latter is a cook. The trip that Chiron takes from Georgia, where he's living and his mother, Paula, is in rehab, to Florida, ostensibly for a reunion with Kevin, however ambivalent, functions in it of itself as emotional as emotional marinage. Chiron traveling between the comforts of his hypermasculine exteriority and the unfreedom of his queer interiority. Jenkins doubles down on the idea of the archive here. Echoing the observations about Barnett's use of music, particularly with Stan's wife, Jenkins offers, quote, "I wanted the music to express the consciousness of the character and not necessarily the propulsion of the plot." Franklin's one step returns upon Chiron's entrance into the diner. Upon Chiron and Kevin's pound and embrace, Chiron had been sitting in the counter for nearly 2 minutes before being recognized, Kevin comments, "You still can't say more than 3 words at a time." The latter comment harkens to Jenkins' comments about how the music served as a site of interiority for the film's character, and for my purposes, as an emotional archive. After Kevin prepares the chef's special for Chiron, as he has promised to in the phone call the night before, they begin to reminisce while Our Love, a song by The Edge of Daybreak, plays in the background. Our Love is another example of analog soul in the film, Chiron reluctantly bearing his soul to Kevin. The song is also another example of Jenkins doubling down on the sonic archive. The Edge of Daybreak, the group's name, another metaphor for marinage in my mind, was formed in the late 1970s at a correctional facility outside of Richmond, Virginia. Eye of Love, the Edge of Daybreak's debut album, was recorded in September of 1979 in one take and had become a long-forgotten memory. There were only 1,000 copies pressed until it was reissued by Numero Uno Records in 2015, the year before Moonlight. The use of the song and the group are notable for the narrative value, making deep connections as they do to the generational reality of mass incarceration for Black men, and the value of nurturing their humanity, in this case via the musical and culinary arts, as Kevin learned to cook while he was in prison. Yet the group's album jacket mantra, "Our bodies are in prison, but we want our hearts and minds to be with the free world," the Edge of Daybreak symbolizes the morning when each of the band members will be free, is also instructive. Their music is the very embodiment of a fugitive archive, recorded in one take as if one might if they were on the run. Chiron and Kevin's reunion turns sideways when Chiron admits that he is living in Atlanta trapping. Kevin's admonishment that "that ain't you" is met with an abrupt response from Chiron, "Nigga, you don't know me," at which point the Edge of Daybreak's "Our Love" fades. Their conversation is momentarily interrupted as the last paying customers exit the diner and Kevin begins to bust tables. When Kevin sits across from Chiron again, the latter queries, "Why'd you call me?" Kevin explains about a man who had come into the diner and played a song in the jukebox, which Kevin then plays. Along with Baby I'm Yours, Hello Stranger is the most well-known song recording of Barbara Lewis, a rhythm and blues pop singer from the 1960s. Hello Stranger, which was written by Lewis, topped the rhythm and blues charts and peaked at number 3 in the Hot 100 pop charts in 1963. The song was subsequently covered by several artists, including British singer Elkie Brooks, The Capitals as the B-side of their 1966 hit Cool Jerk, Yvonne Elliman of Saturday Night Fever fame, whose version was a top 15 hit. Queen Latifah, recording by her given name Dana Ovens, records Hello Stranger on her first all-vocal album in 2004. I offer this list of covers of Lewis's Hello Stranger to make a point that Jenkins had a wide range of versions to use in the film. Ellison's version was a legit pop hit, and Queen Latifah's might have been more familiar for some of the film's audiences. Yet there was something about the sonic quality, the analog quality of Lewis's original that achieved necessary effect within the narrative context of the film. Jenkins' use of Barbara Lewis's Hello Stranger marks Moonlight's penultimate moment. From a narrative standpoint, the song brilliantly mines the collective interiorities of Chiron and Kevin. This notion of a return, literally in the phrase "Hello Stranger," serves both the purpose of Chiron and Kevin's reunion, but a sonic return to a musical archive that animates memory and nostalgia for characters, as well as audiences who might have lamented in many anecdotal instances that they don't make them like this anymore. In his book, Film Blackness, Michael Boyce Gillespie highlights what he describes as Jenkins' quiet tonality as it functions in his first full-length film, Medicine for Melancholy, which is set in San Francisco. As Gillespie writes, Medicine for Melancholy, quote, organizes quiet as interiority force, an effective arrangement of the film's pulsing speculation on Black capacity. The film's quiet conjures the politics of a Black becoming fantasy in the cultural geography of San Francisco. Jenkins notes that Hello Stranger was in the film because, quote, when I lived in San Francisco, there was this soul night that happens on Tuesdays where they would play only vinyl 45s. It was for grown folks. Every time that song came on, I just got this feeling, you know, it was overwhelming, and I wanted to give this feeling to the audience. Jenkins' comments highlights the limitations of formats in the digital era when vinyl 7-inch 45 RPM records and their 10-inch 75 RPM predecessors are more obscure than long-playing 12-inch 33 1/3 records, which was the standard for album-length recordings throughout much of the 20th century. Vinyl 45s, singles, were notable for their short length, generally under 3 minutes, which often necessitates severe edits from the album-length version of songs or two-sided versions of the songs that were literally edited as part 1 and part 2. Yet because of their accessibility, affordability in comparison to album-length recordings, and perhaps disposability, 45s were the format of choice for the masses, particularly in the late 1950s and 1960s, when Black music became integrated into the mainstream of American listening and consumption habit. In fact, Black music, and I'm thinking most profoundly about Motown here, might have been thought of as more disposable in comparison to some of the so-called album-oriented rock music that began to populate FM radio in the late 1960s. Indeed, save the example of Black jazz artists, one would be hard-pressed to think of an album-length recording by a Black soul or rhythm and blues artist that possessed the cultural gravitas of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds or the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in the 1960s until perhaps Sly and the Family Stone's Stand, which was released in 1969. With the shift to digital recordings in the early 1980s and the emergence of the compact disc as a primary format, 45s largely disappeared from the landscape of popular music, except as collectibles. Indeed, one might experience seeing a 45 recording or hearing the crackling of scratches that accompany repeated plays, and there are now at least a generation of Americans who have never seen an actual 45, as one might experience seeing a stranger. Yet, as a conduit to Black maroon archives, 45s proved invaluable to Black archival practices if thought of as possessing little or no value for those who control the intellectual property of these recordings. Thinking again of what gets lost sonically and culturally in the transition from the sounds of the actual old records, the crackling and the scratches from repeated listening, to the kinds of clean digital versions of songs that have been made available via streaming in recent years. That crackling and scratching is as much a part of the archive as the music is itself. Thank you.
Am I reconnected? Yeah.
Yes.
Ooh.
I can see you guys.
Yeah, but now I can't control it, so I think it's cool. Okay, thank you. Okay. So, Elissa, good to see you again. You were just here. I can't believe you're already there. We have been so lucky to have had you. I want to read, I'm just going to read because we spent some time with you already and people got to know you a little bit. The shorter version of the bio, if that's okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. Elissa Blount Moorhead is a filmmaker, installation artist, curator, writer who explores the poetics of quotidian Black life. Since 2013, she's been a partner in the pioneering Teen Egg production company, founded by Malik Saeed and Arthur Jaffa, and co-directed with them Jay-Z's 444 long-form video, and Back in Song with Brad Young, an experimental 4-channel film. She created and directed a 3D mapping and augmented reality installation, As of and Now. Elissa's creative work is always ensemblic work, and we gravitated towards her to ground our ethics of study and to expand our view of what our making should look like. So, Elissa, thank you for making this happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for what you do, Alessandra, and everybody at Liquid Blackness in the time in America, where Blackness is being denied, erased, avoided, and misunderstood. I'm just so always impressed with the way that you study and revere Blackness, and all, especially the B-side. So thank you. And then also really thank you for putting me anywhere in the context of Mark Anthony Neal and Ekow, because these are two incredible minds that I follow, study, dream about, and between the fourth plinth and Mark's writing, it's just such an honor to even be in the room, so to speak. So thank you. So I guess I will try to be as cogent as possible, but I'm probably going to jump around a little bit and try to share just things I've been thinking about. So let me see. I think I'm sharing a screen now. Am I? Yes. Yep, I am. Okay. So let's see. I am not sure how to make you see this, but okay. Are you seeing something on the screen now? Are you seeing the title page there?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. So, I was thinking a lot. I've been in a residency for the last 5 weeks, so I've been spending probably too much time thinking and writing and reading and kind of taking things in. And I started thinking particularly about, the idea of B-side and a story that I'd like to share. But first, I just sort of want to ground, I think you just talked about a little bit about Tina Camp's ideas around fugitivity as more of a disavowal. And I really also like to think of it as like an intentional illegibility, an elusiveness, belligerence, maybe, I don't know. And the disavowal and disavowal and disengagement is something that's really exciting to me, because as a kid our family was in New York for 5 generations, and then we moved to DC when I was young because my father was at Howard, the Mecca. And we, in that move, sort of lived in a utopic scenario, and as for my estimation, me and my sister's estimation, in the Chocolate City. And, so disavowal was something that I really didn't have to do much of, because everything around me confirmed me. And I thought that was real life, and it still is for me. So my practice is really interested in sort of that quotidian kind of stuff, mundanity, the day-to-day. I think Smokey Robinson talks about it as like the day-to-day, not the special occasion, but the kind of like astonishing grace of the day-to-day. And then also transcendence, and not necessarily just fugitivity as away from something, but towards something that we love and that comforts us. And then, I'm really always thinking about these ideas of flight, from like hip hop expressions, like I'm looking at the front door, like trying to get out of a relationship, to, contemplating things like Drexciya and Underwater Worlds. So I shamelessly pulled this quote that my sister wrote for, I think it was MTV's online project, and it's a section of a story about go-go music, which is music that is by and from DC natives. And she's talking to my father, and she said, I asked him why go-go never really made it out of DC, even though we know, it's made it into lots of hip hop records and lots of other places. In fact, there were whole go-go clubs in London when I first moved there. But, why it didn't sort of attain this commercial success. But, and he just answered, it's too African. And what he meant to say was that go-go was too pure of an art form to be contained on a cassette or a CD. It wasn't radio friendly enough. The music went on without breaks until everybody was exhausted. It was improvisational, dependent on the reaction of the audience. It wasn't just the music, it was the whole experience. It's extremely true. And this idea of trance music is something that I also was spending a lot of time with in the last few weeks. Oh, I should back up. I'm working on a project right now that's sort of based in flight, and it's about mapping the idea of flight over the last 55 years since 1968, which is sort of a watershed year in Black American history, and using objects and the ephemera and that sort of thing, and images and time-based media to kind of talk about these 55 moments. And so the story I wanted to share was about this album by the Ohio Players. I don't know how many people have heard it in the audience. It's called Fire. And when we first came to DC, I went to a school called Harriet Tubman, and I had a birthday party, and Fire, was very, very popular. And it was on the radio, which is where most people access music. Not everybody has, albums. I grew up in a house with like about 10,000 albums in the house. We didn't even have television until later period of life, but we had albums and books like furniture. And so I got to spend a lot of time with physical albums. And so I was always interested in literally the B-side, because I just wanted to deny whatever was on the radio. I just wanted to be contrarian, honestly. I'm a Taurus, if that means anything to anybody. But anyway, I had a birthday party, and my mother, graciously organized it. And I remember, and some of these were new kids that were kind of outside of a kind of Pan-Africanist community that my parents had us submerged in. And so some of the kids weren't interested in much more than than what was on the radio. So at some point in the party, everybody kept saying, play Fire, play Fire. And I was like, oh, no. We got to play the B-side. And it was a song, well, there were two actually songs on the B-side. I Want to Be Free, ironically, and another one called Together. And, and I kept campaigning for that. And the kids in the party were like, no, why would you do that? And so in pure tourist form, I left and said, well, I'll be in my room for the rest of the party. You guys can listen to what you want to listen to. And much to my mother's horror and embarrassment, and she came in and said, look, you have a party, you can't be rude. Like, it's just a record. And I was like, it's not just a record. And they're not my people, they're not my friends. So I really took to heart what it meant to sort of disengage with, am I still there? Oh, okay. To disengage with my offering, which was to expand this musical repertoire and for people to be able to contextualize Fire as something that was output from an amazing group that did other things. They sang falsetto, they sang slow songs, so on. And so, and I was completely sort of content with that. And I think deep down, I also knew that the A side of anything is always the accepted side, possibly the commodified side. I wasn't sophisticated enough to think about it that way, but because of the house that I grew up in, I knew that that was like a possibility. So, fast forward, these are my grandparents that my father told me a story about the first, and by the way, I'm going to center a lot of what I'm talking about around my father, which you'll understand why. My father told me like one of the first albums he ever bought, I think he was 11, was a Charlie Parker record, and he brought it home. And my grandfather and my grandmother, who were very culturally astute people, my grandfather said, "That's not real music. That's kind of like thug music. Ella Fitzgerald, that's real music." And I think again that started my father's sort of journey down a road of like deep musical exploration. And it also, what he said for me, provided an opportunity for him to, with his kids, to always make sure that we were of our time, and that while he wanted to expose us to music across the entire Black archive, from Ella on up, who my niece still listens to the music that situates you and makes you present with your peers so that, you can relate. So fast forward, my father, this is us at his Howard graduation. They had us when they were like 19 and 20, and he is a walking archive. He essentially, without talking about it or making a big deal about it, created an incredible archive for us. So there were incredible ways that he did that. One of them was for albums. We had thousands of albums in the house, but you could open an album and out from the album would fall like a yellowing article, ticket stubs, just all sorts of stuff that might be connected to the artist. And so every time we picked up a physical album, it was like an internet search before the internet. And so that was one way he did it. Another way was like he would catalog his records in the most obscure, strange way. And I'd say, "Oh, Daddy, where's, this song?" And he'd say, "Oh, that's female vocalist, below the Mason-Dixon line, that played with blah, blah, blah." Like, and I was like, couldn't it just be A, B, C, D, like everybody else puts their records in alphabetical order? But he would have subcategories on subcategories. And I now think about that, and I think this is like when people give you recipes in your family and they leave out half the ingredients and that it never tastes the same when you make it. And part of it was that you had to engage with him, and you had to engage with the music to figure out where something might belong. And then you might have a different idea of where it belonged, but it was like a very complex, but also like deeply thoughtful system. And, he would do other things. Every year we got a book and an album for Christmas, and we would like pretend to shake it because we knew the exact shape and it would be the same thing every year. But part of his ethos that he would say a lot is, you have to, basically you have to share what you know and what you have. And so you wouldn't just get a book from him. There would be a story, and and I joke all the time and say he'd always had the back version. It wouldn't be just Miles Davis. You'd say, "Oh, this is Miles Davis," but you should have heard this guy that lived around the corner named Miles Blavis. I'm joking, but it would always be some other person, whether it was like basketball, this person, and Clyde Frazier or Earl the Pearl was one of his favorites, Roberto Clemente, all of these people. But then there was also a guy who couldn't be in the leagues because he was, too B-side. I'll just say that, too irreverent or for whatever reason. So, that, and in addition to that, he would do things when I was in school or, even when we were at home, he would make these pause button tapes where they were basically cassette tapes, and somehow he configured our stereo system so that later, this was sort of like towards the end of high school, we had television and VHS tapes, and he would like configure film and the music and then different quotes or like albums that were literary or whatever, and mix them all together. So in the middle of a song, you might hear like a quote from Eraserhead come in, or, just things that were referencing our upbringing with him and our cultural shared knowledge. And, now I realize those were like kind of early mixtapes, that they really influenced the way that I thought about assembly and making images and making films. And then, another thing he did, which I thought was also a sort of generous and beautiful way to sort of teach, was when he would play music, he had a director's chair and he would sit in front of his record player all day and, we'd play music all day, very, very loud in our house. And he would have a record that was up, just sitting up. And I don't even know how much he did this on purpose, but it was kind of like a now playing record. And so even before we were pre-literate, my sister and I could be like, can you play the Chair album? And it would, it could be, actually, I'll share it. Could be this or this. Or can you play the Lip album, which was always this. And, he basically was giving us a visual language and kind of giving us the first music videos, because we would sit and read and look or understand images and liner notes and things like that as a way to imagine something else about the song. We were sonic first and oral first. And so, before music videos, that's what we had. Occasionally we'd borrow a TV and watch if somebody special was on Soul Train. But for the most part, you didn't get to see people as much, the people who made music. So I also want to call out, my father had a radio show on Pacifica Radio for years called Rocco's Rocket Ship. He was nicknamed Rocco. And it was based on someone that was a real hero to him, was Jocko, who was a 1950s DJ. And that's not a big enough word for him. Rapper, really. He used rhyming and rhythmic patterns. My father's show would open, he'd say, from from Sun Ra to Sun House, from Eric B to Eric Dolphy, this is the 360 continuum of Black music. Anyway, this was like an homage in a way. It was a very different kind of show, but, Jocko was also really interested in the sort of intergalacticness of Blackness. And my father was in love and obsessed with Sun Ra. In fact, the first image I ever took, he gave me an Instamatic camera, and I was at a Sun Ra show at like 6 or 7, and I took an image of him that I still have. And so I could see the bridge between what he was doing on the radio and what he would let us come and do with him sometimes. And I was just going to play a little quick clip of Jocko.
Tell him loud and clear that Jocko sent you. Don't forget that, Manu. It's the only one that's WADO radio right here in New York City. And I'm thrilled to say it's still the hottest show on the radio with your engineer, Jocko. On the scene with the record machine. Correct time now, 10:16. The big one, WADO. Let's get into something. Come on now. Oh, shucks.
I just, my father had a similar cadence, only on the radio, not in real life. And, and he would do things like wax poetic about the weather, like he was saying, doing the time and stuff like that. So, and anyway, fast forward to this image here. That's me and my kids and my dad at a music conference, an annual music conference that would happen in New York. And there was a presenter there that shared sort of how they had gotten sort of stems from different art musicians. And stems are like the elements of the music before it becomes a song that that they necessarily didn't want shared. Some of these artists were no longer alive. And I just saw my father like turning green. He was so annoyed by that concept. And then another person that was presenting shared that they had something like 80,000 records and how they kept them in this like very pristine vault of a place, and that they'd have like duplicates of the same record. And then he kind of lost it. That's probably the most annoyed I've ever seen. My father's a very laid back person. And again, I know because of the way that he viewed the archive as something that was generative and generous, and that's something that was supposed to go out and come back in and move around and make new things with, and to feed you as food. This was probably the most offensive thing he'd ever heard in his life. And so I, oops. Oh, sorry. So, you know, I started thinking more about like the way that music operated in my life. And I have a friend who is a poet, Saul Williams, who has a piece that in the midst of it, he says, most of my conversations with men revolve around music. And I know there's like layers in that. And I think about that all the time because a lot of my conversations with men revolve around music, and particularly being a kid that grew up with 80s hip hop. It was a conversation that men often did not want to have with girls. That wasn't girls would listen to R&B, and you know, hip hop was for them. And also a lot of my conversations with men around music are kind of in the realm of blowhardness. Like it's very much a one-upmanship, and it's very much a how much I know over what someone else knows. And you know, it's just one of those places that, you know, as a crate digger myself, you had to just sort of like find your way in there. But it was very contrary to the kinds of conversations that I had with my father around music. And then fast forward, the conversations that I had with women around music, which were about sharing and did you know, and if not, can I give you this? And, you know, even conversations with men around top five, what their top five are, it really would be reduced to almost like a rubric of what what made that work, and often void of like emotion or, you know, swooning to what and discussions about what the music did to you on a cellular level. There are quite a few exceptions to that, but I'm just, you know, this was sort of on a whole. And I started thinking about things like my father would write letters to me all the time, and he would when I was in college, and he always just had these yellow steno pads, I mean, not steno pads, legal pads all over the place. And they would just have lists and lists and lists. And then sometimes the list would say things like, to share with Pierre or Sean Peters, or, you know, my friends who he also counted as friends and sons and collab people. And I realized, you know, that's what he did. He just was constantly going back and forth with the archive, and it was something to share. And it was the beginning of conversations. And it was something that then you wanted to have another conversation about what those songs did to you and what they did to him and all that stuff. And so, you know, I'm lucky that I get to go back on those and look at those. And it's something that I constantly use. And I also have figured out how to sort of continue to have those kind of transcendent conversations with people like Dream or Lene Denise or Rada Blank, people who I know, love, and care about sharing music in a specific way. My sister, Erica, so many. So those conversations are the kind of impetus for what I'm thinking about now and the work that I want to think about. And the ways that people like Betty Carter, you know, who started Bet Car Records, or the Funkadelics, you know, or Sylvester, the way that they disavowed normative ideas around making music or the music business itself, or even what, you know, what was a genre. So, I guess I'm, again, just thinking a lot about what, in folklore, in our lives, in our daily lives, what flight really means. Everything from literally flying to being fly. I was there when the mothership landed, and I really, in the 70s, my father took me to a Funkadelics concert, and I really, really was mesmerized, like most people, but I really wanted to understand this idea of our connectedness to Saturn and to intergalacticness in general. So the kind of ways that I break things up when I'm thinking about them is sort of mundanity and sanctuary and these kinds of ideas underneath them. So, things like rest being a way to teleport, and a way to, the only way to have conversations with your subconscious and your ancestors, or, fellowship, the way that ideas are generated, this dance and music and intimacy, and rest and reconfiguring relationships. And then the other thing that I think a lot about is just transcendence and what that means, whether it's through religion or whether it's quite literal, like moving to another space, time, and what work we create that reflects that. I think you all saw As Told to God yesterday, or the way that we use bravado or skills to transcend authority, or to leave conditions that are that don't allow us to be our full selves, or the way we fellowship and work, and that they're not separate. And then I guess and I want to go back and just play you some things, but I was thinking about archive in particular. And on the left is Ethelbert Miller, and he was, again, for lack of a better word, librarian at Howard. But he's a poet, a thinker, a scholar. And I was lucky to be able to think of him as sort of a normal thing that you have access to in middle school. If I wanted to write about something that was not readily available in the public library, my father would say, oh, I don't know, go ask Ethelbert. And asking Ethelbert is not going to a Dewey Decimal System. It's not going to a database. It's going to a person that's going to give you a book and then sit and talk to you about the impacts of apartheid. And also, do you know who Mary McCabe is? And also, did you know that this happened? And similarly, Greg Tate, who's a friend, another story, Greg sort of came to town a couple of years ago, and we hadn't talked about it. Maybe he told me a while before, but I had forgotten. And it was impromptu, and he said, I'm just going to come by. And he came by, and it was when Shaka Khan and Stephanie Mills were doing a verses. I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's sort of like a battle, very superficial battle, with, I guess, the idea being that somebody wins or somebody doesn't. So anyway, we watched that together, played music, sang, talked, whatever. But more importantly, had a really generative, wonderful discussion about not just a sort of you had to be there conversation, but really why no one should be reduced to that sort of thing. But particularly, it's impossible to reduce a Shaka Khan to that. And that, if you take Shaka Khan out of the context of this girl coming from Chicago and joining the Panthers and singing her face off and doing all those things, it's apples and oranges, and it's a crazy idea to even digitally put her in that kind of realm. And so Greg is another person that, that sort of drop down menu that I described with my father's albums of things sort of falling out of the cover, that's what it's like to listen to music with someone that's kind of this, human archive. And so I wanted to just share a couple of sounds and maybe, oh, and I'm sorry, this last slide I had is because some of these are some of the women that I listen to music with, and that it was really, really, really important to me to say that Greg was a real feminist in that he wasn't talking about theory, he wasn't talking about BS. He was spending time listening and thinking about, and more importantly, connecting women who love music in ways that made it just super generative, I'll say. So forgive my messy screen, y'all, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, I wanted to play some of that go-go music that I mentioned earlier. And I don't know, is it playing? Is it playing? Yes? Sorry, was it playing?
Sorry, I had to come up to the microphone. It's not playing. I mean, we cannot hear it.
You can't hear it?
No. It might have to do with the way you share your screen, right? Share sound?
Yeah, do you hear anything now?
No.
Oh, crap. Okay, so maybe I'll just talk about it. Oh, that's sad. Okay. So anyway, what I was going to just demonstrate or talk about was trance music, whether it's Fela or go-go or Ganawa, like this music that you have to be there live, you have to be present. It's not something that you can archive on a record necessarily, because it's really in hour 3 when you have completely left your body that the music starts to hit you in a particular kind of way. And I also count among that music that that women make in particular, that at the same time collapses this idea of both freedom and flight from something, usually a relationship, with submission as well. And that there's this like this idea of vulnerability is also a kind of escape. So some of those that I was thinking about was like Sparkle for Aretha Franklin, when she talks about like how much she loves this man, but and everybody needs something funky, good, and kind, but that also, that this may or may not be, that she wants agency and submission somehow in the same place. Or Jasmine Sullivan and Mascara, or, Young Hearts Run Free, or, Denise Williams Free. And those things are, I'm sorry, I'm trying to grab a thing. It brought me back to a book that just came out, Why Willie Mae Thornton Matters. I don't know if people can see it, written by DJ Renee Denise. And she talked about Roxanne Shante. And again, her involvement with the archive. There's a record that's made about her because she's actually on the ground at 14 years old, slaying people lyrically. And so Full Force makes a song, and they, it's like a diss record, and she comes back and destroys them. And one of the things that I love, I learned this in her book, is that she apparently recorded the whole song in 7 minutes as a freestyle between going to the laundromat. So, and then she makes a connection between how Big Mama Thornton, with Ball and Chain in particular, that song in particular, how she would improvise it each time she performed it. She was freestyling. And that, again, sort of just struck me as kind of a version of transcendence, that improv is something that you can't get your hands around it. You can't hold me down. Maybe these are the lyrics today. Maybe they're not. I don't know. And, I just found that really exciting. So some of the other songs I was going to play were like No Plans for Tomorrow by The Emotions, as a way to talk about rest and unaccountability, as in, you know, as opposed to Black orthodoxy of like working and being enough and being legitimate. Um, and Lauryn Hill's How Many Mics, maybe one of the best MCs of our time, and also LaBelle, Going on a Holiday. So if you guys get a chance to check those things out, and What Can I Do for You as well, if you can check those things out, I would, you know, love that. And I also wanted to play for you. Let me see if this one will play. Is that playing, Alessandra?
I'm coming. It's playing, and we would love it if you could share the playlist with us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah?
It's not really.
Yeah? How about that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. That played? No. Well, anyway, it's Bernie Worrell's Volunteer Slavery, and the last section, it's in 3 parts: volunteered slavery, Burns Blues, and then the last part is Outer Space Ways, which was the intro to my father's radio show, and an amazing cover. Let me see if this plays, because this is something I downloaded. Tell me if you can hear this.
No.
Okay, 1 sec, it's not on yet. So.
Yeah, if you have a way to share with us, we can play at the conclusion.
Okay. All right. So, so anyway, that is a piece of the archive that is basically an advertisement for the upcoming WHUR radio, which was founded by Howard students, including my father. And it features everybody from Donny Hathaway to Robert Hooks talking about anticipating the importance of a station that is going to play sort of the 360 continuum of Black music. And it's sort of something you have to hear. I found it astonishing. But I don't know how I am on time, Alessandra, but I had some of my videos I can play clips of, but I don't know where we are.
I think this is a good time to open it up, if that works for you, because we did start late, but we want to have time for conversation. I know you're anxious to be in conversation with Mark.
Okay.
Ekow, yeah? All right. If you can stop sharing. Would that be okay for you to stand here? The problem is that she has not been able to see you. So for the Q&A, would you stand around?
Yeah, I know.
Huddle around? Elissa? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Which we all love to do. Yeah, just stop sharing.
Hit stop share, okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a crazy.
There you go, okay.
All right.
And I,
There you go.
all right.
Hey.
All right.
Hey.
Well, thank you so much again. What you gave us now, Elissa, is again, so many of the insights that have been so foundational for us. The idea, right, exactly how, and which is the first question that I want to ask to the panelists, just to open it up, and then we'll open it up immediately, and I want you, all three, to converse, is the relationship between, we call this panel Curating for Sound Curating Ensembles, right? Which is the relationship between archive, curation, and community, kinship, right? You really walked us through all of that. And so can we just bring this back into the middle, and maybe Ekow and Mark can, you know, say how they see these connections, these relationships?
Oh, I'm going first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know, we're in a moment now where we listen to music in privacy. We could go back 40 years to the Walkman and the kind of impact that had. And on the one hand, it democratized our listening because we could listen to what we want. You know, I grew up in a household where I couldn't touch my parents' record player. Right, I couldn't go through my father's albums, right? And my parents are really gendered in their consumption habits. My mother bought 45s, my father bought albums. I always had access to my mother's 45s. I never had access to my father's albums. But I was forced to listen to them listen to music. Right, we had two mantled this high speakers in the living room. There was a third speaker above a counter in the kitchen, and there was a fourth speaker in their bedroom. And music was, particularly when my mother was home, music was going on all the time, right? So for me, music is about socialization, right? It's about a communal process. And I've been frustrated talking to some of the young folks. I had a conversation with my students a few years ago about whether or not they slow dragged. And they had no idea what I was talking about, right? Because they're now in this moment where they don't dance slow with each other. And I was trying to explain to them that, you know, it was a routine that you learned as early as 12 and 13 years old, and it was about social cues, right? How to be in close proximity with someone, right? How to be intimate with somebody but not necessarily sexual, right? Like, so we're in this moment now where we have young folks, right, because they don't do the routine before, for instance, having sex, going to a party and doing a slow drag. They're having sex with each other, right, but they don't even know how each other smells. Right, because during the course of a slow drag, one of the things, you gather information, right, one of which, like, I don't actually really like the way you smell. I don't think I might want to be with you. Right? Or I really like that perfume, or I like that, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, we always have to connect music to this kinship piece. I teach a class at Duke, or used to, with Ninth Wonder, Grammy Award-winning, producer. And he used to talk about, for him coming up in the 90s, there's no streaming services. Someone would get that first Public Enemy album. Right? And they immediately would go to another friend's house and call 15 other friends, and they would all sit around and listen to it for the first time in sequence, right? Because now folks don't listen to music in sequence, right? You just pop the song here, you don't really like the first 30 seconds of this, you move on to that, right? When we were talking about albums, you couldn't do that. Right? I'm just thinking about the number of times my father listened to his Mighty Clouds of Joy album, the live one, that same first side over and over again because he didn't want to get up to turn it over, right? So it would just end and it would play again. So yes, I agree with that kind of connection between music listening, ensembles, right, and the collectivity of listening to music.
I mean, I would add that I was very moved listening to you, Mark, listening to you, Elissa, because I think you both spoke about one of the capabilities of music, which is to draw us together, but also to speak of the things that are very hard to talk of.
Yeah.
Love, connection, hurt, all of these things. Hello, Stranger. That's the song that breaks your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Time and again, day and night. Roxanne Shante, that's, Roxanne's Revenge, any of these things. These are the things that elevate you, but also stay with you. Stay with you and become part of who you are. Yep. Become part of who we are. And I think this idea that both the production, the communication, and the sharing of music can then become part of how we work and how we think.
Agreed.
I think that's such a critical observation.
Yeah.
And a very moving one because, it's who we are.
True. Yeah, it's the first place I go. To make music, I mean, when I was making the Jay-Z video, that's one of the things Malik so profoundly, as always, he's profound, started talking about the nature of apology and contrition. I mean, it's really our visual representation of contrition, right? And he started talking about like this idea of doing the same stupid thing over and over, and at what point do you go and you exit out of that and do something else? And, you know, and that sort of like inspired me in thinking about the then piece that I wrote to try to prompt this video. And, you know, I hope that's what people feel when they're watching, and I hope they feel like the deep contrition that he felt, you know. And then the same thing, like with I was going to share a piece that we were working on with Lauren Hill. That's a sort of interior conversation. This woman is a music scholar. She's not. There's a reason she rhymes like that. She's smart as hell. But she also listens to Cecil Taylor, and, you know, she has a complexity that we just get the end of it, you know? And, you know, so, you know, that anticipatory thing that you're talking about, the slow dance piece, for me, two pieces of good news. One, my 14-year-old is vinyl obsessed, and there's a whole crew of kids that age that are starting to and they actually get together and listen to albums. It's amazing to see. So maybe there's hope. But also, I mean, the sad thing about it now is that it's not like the $3.99 that we could get. People that collect vinyl are hyper aware, and they're hoarders in that way that we talked about earlier. So a lot of times you go and it's overpriced, but they still have access. But the anticipatory part that you're talking about, like meeting somebody, oh, well, they like me. Do I even have the nerve to go across the room? Oh my God. All of that is what is the buildup. And then the unrequited part is even better. Like I might never see them again. I don't have a cell phone. I don't know if I'll find them again, see them at the next party. And all of that buildup to me is really beautifully demonstrated in Steve McQueen's Lover's Rock. Yeah. It is, for me, one of the dopest music videos, and I'm not saying, like, I don't want to degrade what that piece of work is, but I remember seeing it because New York Film Festival had gone online because it was COVID. So remember, we were able to get to it without getting there, and I was like, wanted to rip my skin off. I was so blown away. And I called my father and I said, come over, you got to see this. I can't even describe it. Also preface this with, I had lived in London late 80s into late 90s off and on, and went to raves. So, which were clearly based on those first parties, and was the same vibe, the same anticipation, the same wine up in the corner kind of business, right? And almost felt like I had imagined it because it was just such an incredible feeling, and described it to people back here. And when I saw Lover's Rock, I was like, this is it. This is what I'm talking about. And I called my father over, and he sat down and watched it, and he said, what are we in? He didn't say, what are we listening to? What are we watching? He's like, what are we in? And I was like, we are fully in this situation. I can feel the sweat. I could smell the pheromones. I could feel them putting the wires together. So, you know, for me, that's all I want to do, is to not create so much something that you can say, I saw it, I heard it, but I felt it in the way that you can feel music on your spine. But I have to give it up to Steve McQueen. He somehow made it really, really seductive. My sister says hello to you, Mark.
Hey, what's up, Erica?
It is on. Okay. The only thing, so we're asking for people who want to ask questions to please come up to the 2 microphones on front, just because it's better for the recording. I know it's a little.
I can't hear. Is Alessandra giving a question?
She can hear me?
I don't think she could hear that, but it's fine. We're just
only that one. Okay.
Yeah, we're getting people to come up to the microphone. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
If they've got questions, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adrenaline is all I can say. This story about your father blesses me so much. I hate to do it that I just want to say. Scripture. There's a scripture that says, that Jesus says to the disciples, give as it is freely given to you. These notes that I saw of your father sending messages, they're cheat codes. It's one of the best things you could have in college. It's information. So all of the various songs is information. So thank you for sharing that, right? So in a way, your father was embedding the creativity of your creative partners. Does that make sense? If you shared that information with your friends, then in ways you shared.
You need to come up to this one. I'm so sorry.
Oh, she can't hear me?
No.
Oh my God, that's why she's looking like that.
No, that's fine. She heard some of it, but she's not going to be able to respond in the way that she would like to.
This is going to be a thing.
Yeah, it's okay.
Hey, how you doing? When I saw you, you were so tired. It was like 9 hours.
Put on some lipstick.
I'm so excited. If you could do one thing for me too, if you could go back to that first screen, I don't think it was about transcendence. If you do that, I didn't get a chance to take a photo of that one. But what I was.
This is recorded.
Oh, it's recorded. I'll see it later. I love how you broke that down about napping, time, and all that. But what I was trying to say is that there's a scripture, that one of the things that I liked about the scripture of Jesus talking to the disciples, he says to them, give as it was freely given to you. And what I love about that is sometimes you talked about hoarding. It was you. Hoarding. The person got 3 copies, the plastic, and you said that your father was revolted. He was at something like this. And for the person to say, well, it's in a vault, but it's supposed to be shared. And when I saw those scribbled notes, that inspired me because your father is almost like a minister. Your father was like a minister giving the cheat codes to the people you work with now.
Come on.
You said you sent it. You said that it was sent to Sean Peters. It's sent to Saul Williams. Here's a list for this. He's a minister. That's why sometimes we don't understand that secular and sacred are the same things. Because those people don't have the blocks. The scales have been dropped from their eyes. Maybe with some mushrooms. I don't know. But what I'm saying is they hear something else and they don't have the limitation of oppression and repression on them. So these songs are actual messages. I'm telling you, when I hear Earth, Wind, and Fire fantasy, it's liberating me today. What were they saying? You were talking about Saturn. There's a song by Stevie Wonder, Saturn. There's a song by Bjork. There's a song by Bjork, Pluto, right?
Yeah.
Saul Williams named his first child Saturn, right? So this is, I'm gone. I just want to say thank you. There really wasn't no question. I just really want to say that you're the bomb, and the way that you talked about that blessed me. We must give as it was freely given to us. When you hoard it, and be careful now. We talk about slow jams. The thing that I don't like is that actually we have taken out collective creation of music. The soloist is the one. The bands are interchangeable. What you were talking about before, all those things are groups. Do you remember that? So we got to be careful because even the industry moves towards the individual. So don't get mad when the kids reflect it. Right? Bye.
Wow, that was a word. Yes. I love it.
Someone else coming up to the microphone? Someone's coming. It's a jog. We're going to have to.
I'm sorry, everybody.
No.
Had to beat that hurricane.
I don't know how I can follow that up. That was a great experience. Awesome. Just straight to the point, my question to you is, I heard that you did film, and so as a filmmaker, I'm really in the early stages. So my question to you is, a lot of times it's hard for me to put into words and I guess express with lighting and the camera the abstract thought. And so what is your process that you've experienced, putting the abstract into a visual form?
Thank you. And I have not figured it out yet, but here's what I know. I am definitely audio-centric. What Mark writes and says is really, that's where I dwell, where I want to be all the time. And film is young. Film isn't like music. Film is young, and it hasn't figured it out either. And it's even younger for us, right? So, Malik has given us the blueprint to help represent our skin and our essence, but it's very hard to represent motion. And without sort of telling his business, I know AJ is working on this idea about how you can visually represent Black intonation. Some of this is technical conversations, right? But a lot of it is also about essence. You know what I mean? Like, I look at the things that sit on my spine. Like I said, that Lover's Rock, when I watch that, I'm like, okay, it can be done. Even watching stuff like, Rockers, or, just so many things. Right now, there's a movie out, Rye Lane, that's really a rom-com for us, right? And she does things with fisheye and colors and things that you've seen them in other spaces. Spike Lee is obviously an influence, but it's something about being honest, really, like, not lying to yourself, and then working with people who are also that honest. So when Brad talks about wanting to get to that image from the birth canal, meaning the lens, he made his own lens, okay? That's how he's trying to do it, right? Or, when Sean Peters, as a cinematographer, is talking about a feeling and a representation of a feeling, he's talking about stuff that has nothing to do with the camera or with the technical mechanisms. It's about your particular brand of Blackness. So I guess I'm not being helpful, but I'm trying to say harnessing the truth, even if the other stuff is awkward or the technology doesn't quite do it for you. When I did that As of Now 3D projection, that wasn't invented yet. And I just kept saying, I wish I could take the side off of these abandoned buildings and then have this like ancestral conversation. I wish I could do that. And then eventually sort of the technology was there, but I was really more concerned with the feeling, what I feel when I walk past a building and imagine how interruptions affected our lives and our trajectory, right? So I guess I'm saying to sit with everything that's not film, the books, the music, the community, what Mark is describing, that terrifying feeling when you're trying to meet someone that you're attracted to. Like, all of those feelings are what I think you gather up so that when you see something, you just know it. You know it's right, sorry for not being specific, but I could figure out a way to talk to you through Alessandra as well. But what I'm saying is, what I think both of them were saying is that it's in the real life. It's in the, what I call presence with an S, which is like a bunch of presentness things, right? So, be present and be, active in your own personal archive as well. And, uncovering it, and not taking for granted all of those things that you're experiencing with your colleagues and your peers right now. So we're dissing y'all, and, we'll say, oh, everything is in your phone, but you all are creating some kind of present, some kind of memory around the way you're living at the moment, and extract the humanness out of that and save it, and really draw on that when you're alone and quiet. And also, have some quiet space, go away from your phone so that you can feel it,
Uh-huh. All right, thank you. That's more than enough, I think.
Thank you, Elissa. Thank you so much. We're gonna close here and continue later informally. Thank you. It was amazing having you again. Thank you for,
Oh, yeah.
I know you were speaking to without seeing us, which is hard.
And I'll try to share all the videos and stuff with you, figure out a way, Alessandra, to.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So shall we take, absolutely went over, but I made this call in the moment because the concluding panel, the conclusions with Kara Keeling and Stefano Harney originally would have included also the filmmakers. And so I felt that it was more important, of course, you know, Kaya's here, but I don't know what they're planning to do. And so it felt more important to give space to, you know, Elissa's, you know, presence in the way she made it happen. So we can take a 15-minute break and come back here for the conclusions. Thank you.